Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com, and this is going to be part 2 of this quote-unquote two-tabling 501k session. As I said in the first video, this is actually two separate one-tabling sessions that we cut together to make you less bored. So far I'm up probably 50 on the right table and around 100 on the left. Though most of that was due to winning the big flip or suck out. I think I was slightly behind on the left table. Nobody's gotten super out of line in these games so far this session. But I mean, I'm not going to recap too much. I definitely suggest you watch the first video before watching this one. No reason not to, really. A. Jones opening to 2600 on the right. I don't remember seeing him do that in the previous videos. So that's something to pay attention to. I don't think a player as good as him is going to be giving much away with his raise sizing, but still worth looking out for. Here on the bottom right, 8-6 suited is usually a playable hand, but I think that I should be folding here against. I don't think you can call profitably. Looks like I was thinking about re-raising, which actually wouldn't be a terrible option, but I don't think that we're deep enough to call, or he's a weak enough player. Given what I've seen, he seems pretty solid. And if he were a fish, I would call this in position, or if he were some kind of super nit, which I guess I'd still consider a fish, I could call it and then take it away on a lot of flops like this one, or ones that don't connect with my hand as well as this. But anyways, I did call, so I can't take that back. And flop mid pair and a gutter, and I turn a double gutter. Now the 5 or the 9 gives me the straight. And I actually think I can profitably bet call here. Honestly, a lot of the reason for the bet is protection, just because I expect him to fold a ton of the time, like almost always when he checks given these stack sizes. But that said, I do have enough outs to bet call if he does shove here, and occasionally I'm ahead of a hand like Queen Jack of Hearts or any random heart draw. And if I am behind to like kings or something, I have plenty of equity. But the main reason for this bet is protection, and somewhat balanced. I'm going to be floating here a decent amount, and will want to be able to bet fold this turn sometimes. So I have to have this in my range for hands I can bet call. On the left table, I just open folded Queen 4 suited in the small blind. That's usually a hand that I would open against a lot of players, but 200 big blinds deep against a tough, aggressive player, I think you just have to be folding there and really folding a lot of your small blinds. There's not really much you can do out of position against a tough player, especially the deeper you get. And Jack 7 suited is an open. On the right table, stacks are a little bit weird. A. Jones and I are fairly deep, and then everybody else is somewhat short, with JCR being very short. So I have to be cognizant of that when I'm making my raises pre-flop, in terms of which hands I'm raising and how large I'm raising. I think I should be raising a little bit smaller. Weird spot here on the, not weird spot, but weird action. I open. Benjamin called. Z made a large re-raise to 16k, and Benjamin insta-called, which is bizarre to me. I think he's folding this flop. Yeah, to me it means a lot of kind of like suited Broadway type hands. Jack 10 suited, Queen Jack suited. So now on the right, A. Jones makes it 2,500. I'm not going to read too much into his sizing, but I'm just pointing it out. That's something to pay attention to, especially since two tabling will be a little bit slow, so I need something to focus on. Here, ace-9 offsuit, not really strong enough, even though he's opening so wide. Just a hand that plays terribly when I'm played back at. And ace-8 suited is a pretty easy call here. I don't think doing anything else makes sense, to be honest. Looks like I'm thinking about a re-raise, but yeah, I don't think a re-raise would be very good. On the right table, I think I have to fold there with the short stack in the pot. With A. Jones, had the short stack folded, I'd consider calling and consider 3-betting, just because position's so powerful. On the left, I flop a lot of backdoor draws and ace high. I don't hate a lead, but I can't say I really love it. The board's very coordinated. On one hand, it's going to connect with a lot of their holdings, but on the other hand, you know, my lead would look very strong, considering that that's kind of a coordinated board to be leading on. And now that I hit my 8, I'm just going to try to show it down. Don't expect to be good that often, but I just don't think a bet would serve much purpose. Z-bet's 6,000, and I mean, he definitely could be bluffing there and is capable of it, but I think that given it's three-way pot and he checked it down to there, I think he'd check back with a decent amount of hands with showdown value, so I think he might have rivered a straight or two pair, and he'd have a lot of hands in his range that wouldn't be or wouldn't need to bluff, would just show it down with like mid-pair hands like mine. So I think that while he is definitely capable of bluffing, it's not going to be enough of the time for me to make a profitable call there. Big hand on the right table. I'm going to back the action up a little bit. So, weird. Okay. Backed it up a little bit too far. Sorry guys, having trouble with this. Alright, well, somebody raised pre-flop. I'm assuming A. Jones raised, and everybody called. Oh yeah, this is where I had 9-8. And on the flop, I would have turned an open-ender. On the flop, A. Jones bets. Euromaniac calls. JCR calls. You'll notice, or if you remember in the first video, JCR made a strange overcall. As this is a strange overcall too, just with stack sizes, a lot like the other one, where his stack size should cause him to be shoving most of the hands he's playing rather than calling. This gets checked through. JCR, alright, A. Jones can have a lot of things. All he did was c-bet a dry board. Euromaniac has to have some kind of pocket pair, a jack or a 5, or a flush draw, and I'd give JCR the same exact range, although I think that we usually hear from a 5. Sorry, I think that expression is funny. We usually hear from a 5 either on the flop or on the river. And yeah, in A. Jones' spot, I lean towards folding here, even though Euromaniac shouldn't show up with a lot of like value hands, like thin value hands. I wouldn't expect 7-7 to be shoving here, or even like I guess Jack 9 might. But I don't know. With two people in the pot, I think he might be a little bit scared to bluff. We still don't know a lot about him. He still might be scared money in this game. So here on the left, I check behind with King 8 after raising. I think that c-betting's fine, but checking behind is fine too. I like to make my c-betting range a little bit stronger by checking back. I think a little more often than most players. Which, you know, you give up a few pots that you wouldn't have given up otherwise, but there are also plenty of spots where you lose less money by c-betting or by not c-betting when you would have been played with, and also kind of as part of your overall game plan, especially against players who check call light or against players who check raise light. You make your c-betting range stronger, and if they don't adjust, makes them or their check raising or check calling more of a mistake against you. And you actually do have some options on the turn. You're not obligated to just call a bet when they bet or fold. I think a lot of people feel that they can't bluff raise turns when they check behind flop, but bluff raising turn when you check behind flop, I mean, assuming it's a card that is somewhat reasonable, like a card that you could have hit 2-pair on, or somehow hit a straight that you wouldn't have, that you would have checked behind the flop with. And if you could have hit 2-pair, it has to be a board that you could legitimately raise 2-pair on, not one that 2-pair is not a strong enough hand to be raising. But anyways, point is, play around with checking behind more flops and play around with raising some turns. You get into some interesting spots where people are leading into you on every single turn, like with 80% of their range, 90% of their range, and then you raise and they just have super weak range and have a lot of trouble playing back at you. So here on the right, not a great spot. I do have ace high, I do have the over and the gutter. I think I'm going to end up calling here. He's only betting a little over half pot, so I think it calls probably best, but I am worried about him barreling me off my hand, or Z coming over the top, or sorry, hack. And I decided to raise, which, you know, prevents hack from messing around and prevents me from getting 2-barreled. I think it's fine to do this for sure. The only reason I'm more inclined to call is because I have some showdown value, and I feel comfortable calling a lot of turns with this hand and trying to, you know, sometimes take it to showdown, sometimes turn it into a bluff on the river, and sometimes hope to improve. Weird spot here. So he calls, and I hit my ace, which I think now I have the best hand a decent amount of the time, but I don't really expect to get a lot of value from it. I am slightly worried about getting blown off the best hand, but that's not a huge concern. So I decided I'm going to bet the turn a little bit on the smaller side. We are very deep, so it's going to be really tough for him to check raise here. And I don't expect to get paid a ton on a lot of rivers, but there's some merit to protecting my hand, and at the same time I do look a little bit fishy there. Like, it is a little bit hard to believe, because if I did have a hand like King Jack, I probably wouldn't be betting the turn. And ace is a card that a lot of people continue to bluff on, so I do expect to get credit for a bluff there a decent amount of the time. I just don't know how often I'm getting his whole stack there, and I kind of think that if I got stacks in, I'd probably be in pretty bad shape. Alright, so here I check behind on the flop with 2 overs and a flush draw. Very deep. This is far from standard, and I would say that it's probably not the optimal way to play, but especially deep stack, and especially against a very smart and high intensity player. I think I've discussed intensity in previous videos, and I have been meaning to do a video dedicated to it, although it's not that complex a concept. But essentially, high intensity players are players who are smart and then are very focused on making the best play with the knowledge they have. So for instance, if he thinks I can never have a flush in this spot, he's someone who will do something about it, whereas kind of like your 8-tabling reg, if you really sat down and thought about it, would be like, okay, he probably doesn't have a flush, but is not gonna he's not gonna that often check raise the turn and bomb the river just because of that, whereas A. Jones is a player who will make good reads and then back those reads up with aggressive plays. So anyways, it's important to be able to have hands like this in your range when you check back, so that you're well balanced and you can't just and that he can't take advantage of your weakness on this turn. And actually, one thing to think about is it's a little bit better to be able to check back and hit a nut hand here. So a hand like ace 7 of hearts, let's say. This would be a more attractive play, because then I am obviously very comfortable getting in 200 big blinds in this 7.5 big blind pot on the turn. Whereas now, I can play this queen 10 kind of aggressively. But let's say he bets and I raise and he comes back over the top on the turn. Now I'm in a pretty crappy spot, and he's kind of, even though I have a much stronger hand than he thinks I can have when I check behind flop and the flush hits, he's now really turned my hand into a bluff catcher, because he quote-unquote knows that I can't have the nuts, even though I presumably could, because I check behind this hand. I could check behind the nut flush draw. But he's taking advantage of it by repping the nuts, and I'm not super comfortable. I might even end up folding my hand, and just puts me in an ugly spot, whereas if I have the nuts here on the turn, and he just goes with his read that I can't have it, obviously then I can happily get 200 big blinds in and really capitalize off just one small deceptive play. So he bets, and I think the best play is to raise here for sure. I do think he'll give me a decent amount of credit with my raise. Looks like I'm going for the call. I think a raise is better. You get more value from a lot of the hands that he is semi-bluffing with, or like even a hand just like 8-9 of hearts. Oh, sorry, like I guess 8-9 with a heart isn't playing it that way, but like let's say ace queen with a heart, or ace jack with a heart. I might end up calling the turn, or even potentially re-raising the turn. And now when he bets the river, I think it's a mandatory raise. And he snap folds. So I think he was bluffing, and I think he was taking advantage of the fact that I rarely have a flush or a strong hand in that spot. So that worked out fairly well, I think, just given how fast he folded. But yeah, I still prefer turn raise, even though it looks like that wasn't the best way to play against his exact hand that time. Here on the left, I 3-bet Jack 10 offsuit. Steve Sung min raised the button, which it was the first time he did it, and I took that to mean weakness. I thought that he would be raising bigger or limping with his stronger hand, since he had a history of doing both of those and has gotten played back at a little bit. And on a flop this dry, there's no need to bet more than half pot. And this is a board where I'll react very differently on turns against different players. Some players are just not really capable of floating here, so when they call the flop, they have an ace, a 5, or potentially like pocket 7, something like that. And against that range, I just have to check fold. But there are definitely players that are very capable of floating here, and against them, I'll have to occasionally 2-barrel or even consider check raising the turn. When I turn a 10, there's really no reason to bet. I don't think I'm getting called down by a hand like 7s, and I don't think that I'm getting an ace to fold. Obviously not getting a 5 to fold. It goes check, and I think he almost never plays a 5 this way. I think it's very likely that he has a low pocket pair, something like 3s or 4s, maybe 6s or 7s, or 8s. But it's also somewhat likely that he has an ace, and I don't think that there's a ton of value in a bet here. I don't hate it because I am pretty confident I have the best hand. But I don't know how I feel about this. I think it's pretty marginal. And, even though I'm pretty confident I have the best hand, I'm still not sure I have the best hand when called. And this does give him the opportunity to turn a hand like 4s into a bluff, whereas, because now he can rep the straight or rep some kind of slow-played weird hand, whereas if I checked to him, he would likely just check it down and not turn it into a bluff. Had I checked and he bet, I would have to fold this hand. And just given that he hasn't gotten super out of line and nothing missed, even like the one float got there with and he ended up having queens, which is pretty surprising to me. Don't love my bet, but definitely not bad. But I do think that um, I should have checked there and folded to a bet. Like I was saying, I think it's very possible that he could bluff raise the river. He's certainly capable of that. Where it's a spot where he would not bluff one check to. So I have a pretty easy river decision if I check, and a tougher one if I bet. And that combined with not getting much value. Sometimes a small bet like that is good as a block bet, because it makes them play in a way that is further from optimal than had you checked. But I think my bet made him play closer to optimal than he would have had I checked, if that makes sense. Just because I think he wouldn't have bluffed with a high enough frequency if I checked, and would bluff with a pretty good frequency when I bet, or at least a better frequency than when I check. So on the left, Z raises, I call, Benjamin calls, and when it's checked to me, I decide to bet with my gutter over and backdoor flush draw. I think it's very unlikely I'm getting check raised, though it's possible, and I'm happy to take down the hand now, even if I do have the best hand with ace high, and I definitely have outs to improve. We're also pretty deep, so it's a tough spot for them to go crazy. And on this river, I think it's a close decision as far as whether to bluff or not. But David leads into me, and nothing at all missed, so unless he check called the flop with something like, I don't even know, Queen Jack, it was like a pure float, I can't beat anything here, and so I just have to fold my ace high. It looks like I was for half a second considering raising, which is a valid option. I just can't call. I decided not to raise, which I think is, you have to raise there occasionally, but I don't like to go too crazy with it. David's definitely capable of making a weakish bet there with the nuts, or near nuts, in hopes to induce a bluff raise. Whereas some people are not capable of that. Some people give some things away with their bet sizing, but I think David's smart enough not to, or at least to mix it up. Open ace queen on the right table, entirely standard, of course. JCR calls, and it's a pretty awkward spot here on the flop with stack sizes. I think the best play is to check here and probably call a lot of turns, make decisions on rivers. It's not a good turn, just because it connects with so many low card hands. Looks like I'm playing around with the stats, but I don't know what they mean now, so I doubt I knew what they meant then. I guess I'm looking for, like, I don't even know, bet turn one check flop, but I don't even know if that exists. Bet turn when I check behind flop. I bet that's a stat. But essentially that decision comes down to how often he's betting the turn with just total air, just like Queen Jack. And if he's doing that, then I can call there with ace queen. But if he's only doing it with gutters plus, so like pairs and then any draw that's a gutter or better, then I don't think I can call profitably. Looks like I'm considering 3-betting here. I think it'd be okay to 3-bet nines here. He is hex opening the cutoff. So I would be comfortable getting it in 100 big blinds deep, but not ecstatic about it, given that he's like not a huge 4-better. And nines is a hand that plays kind of poorly in 3-bet pots out of position as the 3-better. Flop gets checked through, and I decide to bet the turn. I think he has a lot of showdown value type hands, so like a 5 or a 3 or ace high. And so that was a value / protection bet, mostly value. I'm a little bit surprised he folded, actually. And I just took the note on the left that Steve Sung checked back to flush draw on all streets, which is pretty interesting. So this is another spot in the previous video, we had a spot where I decided not to 3-bet because I was hoping to get Mr. Smoky to squeeze. This time I considered doing that and then went for the 3-bet. Obviously, I'm happy getting kings in here against Z, though more likely he'll call or fold. But I think he will call pretty wide here with being that we're 140 some big blinds deep. Bad flop, obviously. You always have a couple options here. The problem with a bet is you're not getting much value from worse hands. But the problem with a check is that you turn your hand face up, deep stack against a tough player out of position. So I think the best play is usually to bet. I think you should check it some percentage of the time, but then you also need to check strong hands some percentage of the time. And now that I'm called, I think the best play is to check down, and if he does bet, I'm going to be in a pretty ugly spot. The thing is that the board's so dry that all I beat is floats now, if he bets. Obviously, I beat a lot of like 8-8 type hands right now, or 6-7, but they're probably not going to be betting the turn. So if he does bet the turn, I think I'm in bad shape. And a bad river, I mean, not terrible, but 6-7 now beats me, 7-7 now beats me. Don't really think he had like any kind of straight that came in. So I'm going to check and probably fold, but not definitely. I think it's worth considering. He could turn a hand like eights and do a bluff here. And so here on the right table, I get led into by JCR, and I think I just have to fold. And yeah, Z had threes. He could have turned those into a bluff, and wouldn't be shocked if he did, but I think that's kind of a standard play on his part to peel the flop and check it down from there. And here against Steve, I decided to make a loose call on the button, just given that we're pretty deep, and I haven't seen him around playing no limit much, so I kind of assume he's a weaker no limit player. Although, actually, like I said, I played with him, or in the last video, I played with him in the Heads Up event, the World Series, and he played very, very well. And on the right, I decided to 3-bet A.E. Jones's open. Obviously, Ace-4 is a terrible hand, but he's been opening what appears to be every button. Just watching this playback, it seems like he's been opening every button when folded to him, and I haven't 3-bet him yet. I haven't been 3-betting much at all, so I think that he gives me a lot of credit there. On the left table, I decided not to take a stab at the flop in a 3-way pot. I think Steve Sung's checking with some kind of showdown value. Interesting that he raised the turn here, because he did just check back a flush draw in a previous hand, so he pretty easily could have the flush here. And he seems to be, as I remember from playing him heads up, a tough, tricky player. Here on the right table, JCR squeezes, and A.E. Jones makes a big shove. Not big for JCR, but big for him and Hack. And Hack cold calls, so I assume that Hack was hoping to induce the squeeze with a big hand, which is a pretty good play. And yeah, that's pretty standard by A.E. Jones to get that in there. But well played by Hack. If he thought JCR was likely to squeeze for whatever reason. I don't remember the read that JCR is super squeeze happy. I just know that he 3-bets pretty light. But Hack might have noticed that. And that is something to always be aware of. People's 3-betting tendencies in spots where there's just one opener and no callers, and compared to spots where there's an opener and a caller, or an opener and two callers. I think people vary a lot in those spots, and it's really important to note, both for hands like that where you can trap with a big hand and get squeezed on, and for hands where you want to make a marginal call of somebody's open, and then you realize that somebody behind you is a pretty big squeezer, and you realize that you can't make that call because of all the times you're going to have to fold to their re-raise. I've said this a couple times, but I should be opening a little smaller on the right table here with the short stack. And it looks like JCR is playing hack heads up and is, I assume, up a lot. He had 200k on the table at 300 600, and hack had like 25k. So that'll affect how he plays a little bit, and hopefully I'll keep an eye on that. Here I check behind flop. This is actually kind of an interesting spot. I check behind flop with ace high and a gutter. I turn a double gutter, and he bets a turn. I'm definitely not folding the turn. I sometimes have the best hand and can take it to showdown. The question is, do I call the turn or shove the turn? I think that he's capable of betting a lot of one pair type hands like pocket fives or ace 7, king 7, things like that, and potentially folding them on the turn. I know I don't rep a whole lot. Basically, I'm trying to rep, I don't know, 5-6, 7-4, 8-4, and 10-4 all suited because I don't really open any of those hands off suit. Or, a deceptively played straight that I check behind the flop with, which I will do some, non-0% of the time. I think that it's pretty close between raising and calling. I think that raising is kind of good for your overall game in that people can't bet turns into you as much as they otherwise would, since I think betting turns into the preflop raiser when they check behind ends up being a pretty profitable play, given that people don't check behind strong enough and don't play turns as loosely and aggressively enough. So this is kind of a good way to combat people betting too many turns into you. Also prevents him from bluffing me off the best hand on the river, or improving with a hand like Queen Jack that will have to fold to this now. Could take him off a hand like King 9, or I guess I don't really mind if he calls with King 9. Ace 9 I would mind if he called with for sure. Might be able to get him to fold that. But yeah, all in all, I think it's a good play with my probably 11 outs if called. So he does end up calling with top pair. I'm really surprised he took that long, but I suck out, which seems to be the theme of this video, or these last two videos. Given how long he tanked with Jack 10, I think that's clearly the right play to be shoving there. If he considered folding Jack 10, which I'm really shocked that he considered folding. Honestly, I don't feel like he was considering folding. I think he was probably just like, I don't know, rooting for a card, getting ready to sweat the river. And here looks like I'm thinking about re-raising A. Jones again. He's a little bit shorter now, and I did just re-raise him, and obviously it's just kind of a leveling war at this point. I just re-raised him, so am I less likely or more likely to re-raise him again? He's still opening a lot of buttons, so I think it's probably plus EV in a vacuum, although not one of the best hands to be 3-betting with, and you don't want to go overboard doing that because it's just fairly likely that or it just makes your range too weak in those spots, and if you're putting in a lot of money out of position with weak hands and somebody knows it, then it's pretty easy to take advantage of you. Actually wasn't paying attention to the action on the right table here. Um, if it gets to showdown, I'll back up the action and talk about their play. Right. Alright, so it looks like ace-5 and 7-8. And I backed it up too far once again. Alright, I think this is the hand. Hack raises, JCR calls. Hack has ace-5, JCR has 7-8. If Hack c-bets here, given stack sizes, okay, I was going to say I'd prefer JCR to raise rather than call on this flop. So he makes a smallish bet, and pretty quickly I think that had I been fully focused I would have noted that. And Hack check calls. Given that he checked, I like his call. I think a bet's also fine. And he check call leads. Interesting play. I think it depends a lot on the player. It's something like against a weak player who's not going to hand read all that much, it's definitely a good play to lead there. Against a tougher player, on level 1 it becomes a worse play because you look very strong, but then you look strong, so then on the next level you should be leading weak there, so therefore you can be leading strong sometimes to balance that, etc., etc. But yeah, basically I think it's fine play, probably a good play in this spot. And River's a deuce doesn't change a whole lot for either player. Hack isn't really check call leading with like king deuce, I think. So it's not something JCR has to be concerned about. I mean, potentially 3 deuce, but he was already beat by that hand. 4-3 he now beats. Although I don't know if he'll expect Hack to turn that into a bluff. And so Hack bets kind of smallish, and JCR snap calls. Not anything super weird there. JCR could find a fold there potentially, given his reads on Hack, pending his reads on Hack. But I don't really think that that's a bad play by either of them, or a bad play by JCR, and definitely I think well played by Hack. And JCR shoves here. I think I'm curious to see if he would be shoving like just 2 overs here, like king queen type hand. Just given that he expects to get a lot of folds, and when he does get called, he has some outs. It wouldn't be a bad play if he does, but yeah, he just shoves a flush draw, so it doesn't tell us much. And Hack makes a good call and ends up holding up with his queen. And I open to 4K usually in the small blind, especially with stacks this deep against tough players. I kind of just want to discourage him from playing pots with me as much as possible. And on this flop, I think betting and checking are pretty close. And I decide to bet, which is fine. Hack calls. And I think my standard here is to check. I wouldn't hate a bet because I do hate when he bets here with a hand like 6-5 and I have to fold. And bet could potentially take him off a hand like 7-8 or protect against a hand with outs. But I do think this gets checked through a decent amount of the time. If he does bet, I might consider calling just because of how often I think he'd check back with like a 7 or a 9 and raise the flop with a 2-pair type hand. So I'm mostly looking at queens when he bets, or his all the 100,000 draws that are on this board. And river's going to be a tough decision. Flush draw hit, and he's also capable of betting kind of thin here with like a hand like 9-8, given that the queen paired. I'm curious to see what I did. I think it's really close. It's one of those spots where a lot of straight draws missed and a flush draw came in, so it's a good spot to bluff. But he knows I know that, and he knows I know that he knows that. I think I said that right. So I don't really mind any play here. Honestly, I wouldn't even mind a raise. I ended up calling, and he did have the queen that he checked behind the turn with. A little surprised that he checked behind the turn, but obviously, as I've talked about, it's important to be deceptive against tougher players, which I like to think I am, and also players that know your game pretty well, like I do with his game. I'd expect him, or he should be doing as much as possible to deceive me, given how much I know about his game. So he, in pots against me, should be straying pretty far from his normal game, which I think he's doing a pretty good job of. Here on the left is a similar spot to before where, I could get squeezed on by Smokey, but it's a spot where, given stack sizes, I'm not like ecstatic to get squeezed on, so I actually prefer a 3-bet here. Because if I call and Mr. Smokey squeezes, I can't get it in 200 big blinds deep, whereas if we were 100 deep, I would have liked to call, then have Mr. Smokey squeeze, Z either call or fold, and then I would ship it. But I think that I'd rather just re-raise there and play the pot heads up, and I would be comfortable getting it in pre-flop. Looks like I was considering leading and decided not to. And it looks like Tom just sat in on the right table. Again, like Z and Hack, I know a ton about his game, and so I'm not gonna go too in depth on my reads on him. Although everybody, I'm sure, knows a lot about how Tom plays. But I will discuss the way I play my hands against him. And Z makes my decision easier by raising. And this is actually a good point to stop. I think this will be a 3-part series, with this being part 2. Hope you guys enjoyed, and definitely ask any questions you have, either in the... Actually, the comments section is a lot better. It's tough for me to check the comments section and the threads. So, or not tough, but it's just easier to read the comments section because I do that regularly. So any questions you have or suggestions, criticisms, whatever, I prefer you post that in the comments section. And I'm looking forward to hearing them. Thanks for watching. This has been Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com. Take care.